The splintered wood lay scattered across the hardwood floor like broken bones, each fragment catching the afternoon light that streamed through the living room window. Chen knelt among the pieces, her fingertips tracing the familiar curve of what had once been her grandmother's 1967 Martin D28, the guitar that had survived 3 generations of women who refused to let their voices be silenced. "It was an accident, sweetheart." Her mother's voice carried that practiced tone of forced calm, the same voice she'd used when explaining away the bruises that appeared and disappeared like seasons. Linda Chen Morrison stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, wedding ring catching the light as her fingers twisted nervously. "Rick was just moving some furniture around. He didn't see it there behind me." Maya's dark eyes remained fixed on the destruction. The guitar's neck had been snapped clean through, the steel strings curled like abandoned question marks. The sound hole gaped open, violated, its inner bracing exposed like broken ribs. She could smell the wood glue and the faint scent of her grandmother's lavender oil that had somehow survived decades of playing, practicing, dreaming. "He saw it, Maya," whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. At 17, she had learned the weight of silence, how it could protect and punish in equal measure. "He saw it, Mom." Rick Morrison appeared behind Linda, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway. His polo shirt was pristine, not a thread out of place, his graying hair perfectly styled despite allegedly moving furniture. His insurance salesman smile, the one that had charmed Linda 3 years ago, stretched across his face like plastic wrap. "Maya, honey, I'm so sorry. I was backing up at that bookshelf and I just didn't realize it was right there behind me." His voice carried the practiced sincerity of someone who'd spent years convincing people to trust him with their most valuable possessions. "We'll get you a new one, a better one, something modern." The words hit Maya like physical blows. Modern, as if her grandmother's guitar was obsolete, replaceable, just another object in Rick's carefully curated suburban kingdom. She stood slowly, her petite frame trembling with an emotion she couldn't yet name. The guitar had been her escape, her confidant, the bridge between her heritage and her dreams. Every evening, she'd sit on her bedroom floor, fingers dancing across the frets, playing the songs her grandmother had taught her, traditional Chinese melodies woven together with American folk tunes, creating something entirely her own. "This was my grandmother's," she said, her voice stronger now. "She brought it with her from California in 1973. She played it when my mother was born. She played it when—" "And now we can honor her memory with something new," Rick interrupted, stepping fully into the room. His presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the space. "That old thing was always buzzing and going out of tune." Maya's hands clenched into fists. The Martin had been perfectly maintained, restrung monthly, the action adjusted by Mr. Patterson at the music shop downtown, who'd known her grandmother personally. It never buzzed, never failed to hold its tuning. Rick knew nothing about guitars, about music, about the careful attention required to keep an instrument alive and singing. "Where were you when it happened?" Maya asked suddenly, looking directly at her mother. Linda's eyes darted away, focusing on a spot just over Maya's shoulder. I was in the garden, watering the roses." The words came out too quickly, rehearsed. "I heard the crash and came running." The garden. Maya glanced toward the back window where she could see the automatic sprinkler system Rick had installed last month, the one that watered the roses every morning at 6 a.m. and every evening at 7 p.m. It was currently 3:15 in the afternoon, and the roses looked perfectly hydrated. "The security camera," Maya said quietly, more to herself than to them. Rick had installed cameras throughout the house 6 months ago, claiming it was for their protection, for their peace of mind. But Maya had always felt watched, observed, like a specimen under glass. The camera in here should have recorded it. She watched Rick's face carefully, noting the micro-expression that flashed across his features before the smile returned.
It was barely perceptible, a tightening around the eyes, a slight downward twitch of his mouth, but it was there. "Oh, that camera's been acting up," he said, his voice just a fraction too casual. "Haven't had a chance to fix it yet. You know how technology is." Maya nodded slowly, filing this information away. Rick was meticulous about technology. He'd set up the entire security system himself, spent hours programming schedules and alerts. She'd seen him check the cameras obsessively, reviewing footage on his phone during dinner, monitoring who came and went. The idea that he'd leave a malfunctioning camera unfixed was absurd. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket, a text from her best friend Arya. "Still on for practice tonight? Coffee shop open mic is tomorrow, and you need to nail that new song." The new song. Maya had been working on an arrangement of her grandmother's favorite Chinese lullaby, translating the lyrics into English while keeping the original melody intact. She'd planned to perform it tomorrow night, her first public performance of something truly personal. The coffee shop's open mic night had become legendary among local teenagers, a place where authenticity mattered more than perfection. "I need to clean this up," Maya said, kneeling back down among the wreckage. Each piece felt sacred, irreplaceable. The bridge, carved from ebony, lay in 3 pieces. The tuning pegs were scattered like dice, their chrome surfaces reflecting fragments of the afternoon light. "Leave it," Rick said, his voice carrying a new edge. "I'll take care of it. Don't want you cutting yourself on the splinters." But Maya was already gathering the pieces, her movements deliberate and careful. She found the small mother-of-pearl inlay that her grandmother had added above the sound hole. A tiny dragon, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The dragon was intact, miraculous in its survival. Linda stepped closer, her hand reaching toward Maya's shoulder before stopping midair. "Sweetheart, maybe Rick's right. Let's just—" "No." The word came out harder than Maya intended. She looked up at her mother, seeing the woman who had once sung along to these very strings, who had begged Maya to play just one more song during the long months after the divorce. "I'm keeping every piece." Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's no point in keeping junk, Maya. It's just going to take up space." "It's not junk." Maya stood again, cradling the neck of the guitar like a wounded bird. "And it's not taking up your space. It's going in my room." The silence that followed felt dangerous, charged with unspoken tensions that had been building for 3 years. Maya had watched Rick slowly colonize their house, replacing her mother's art with his golf trophies, moving furniture to suit his preferences, suggesting changes that always seemed reasonable until you realized your entire life had been rearranged around his needs. "Your room is part of this house," Rick said quietly. "This house that I pay for." There it was. The truth that lived beneath all the forced family dinners, the awkward attempts at bonding, the careful politeness that had characterized their relationship since he'd moved in. "Maya," Linda's voice carried a warning, a plea for peace at any cost. Rick didn't mean— Yes, he did. Maya met Rick's gaze directly, unflinching. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, after all, descended from a woman who had crossed an ocean with nothing but a guitar and a refusal to be silent. "And now I know exactly where I stand." She turned and walked toward the stairs, carrying the broken neck of the guitar like a torch. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of Rick's voice and her mother's apologetic responses, the sound of a woman making herself smaller to keep the peace. In her room, Maya carefully laid the pieces of the guitar on her bed, arranging them like puzzle pieces she might somehow fit back together. The afternoon sun slanted through her window, illuminating the damage in stark detail. She thought about the thousands of hours she'd spent with this instrument, the calluses on her fingertips built up from years of practice, the way the wood had grown warm under her hands. Her laptop sat open on her desk, streaming music software visible on the screen. She'd been learning to record herself, building up layers of harmony and rhythm, dreaming of the day she might share her music beyond the coffee shop's small stage. Those dreams felt more distant now,
contingent on an instrument she could no longer afford to replace. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Danny Martinez answered on the second ring. "Maya, what's up? Arya said you might need to borrow my acoustic for tomorrow night." Danny worked part-time at Patterson Music, the same shop where Maya's grandmother had bought strings and picks for decades. He was 2 years older, already graduated and working toward his audio engineering degree. More importantly, he understood the relationship between a musician and their instrument. "Danny, I need to ask you something weird. The security cameras at your work, how long do they keep the footage?" 30 days, I think." "Why?" Maya stared at the broken guitar, an idea forming. "What about the camera system Rick Morrison bought from you guys last year? The one for residential use?" "The Morrison account. Yeah, I remember that installation. Pretty elaborate setup for a suburban house. Those cameras store everything on a local server with cloud backup. Footage keeps for 90 days unless manually deleted. But Maya, why are you asking about... If someone wanted to delete footage from just one camera, could they do that without affecting the others?" A pause. "Technically, yeah, but it would leave a log entry. Any deletion gets recorded with a timestamp." "Maya, what's going on?" She told him everything. The broken guitar, Rick's convenient story, the malfunctioning camera, her mother's rehearsed responses. As she spoke, she found herself moving toward her window, looking down at the backyard where Rick now stood near the roses, his phone pressed to his ear, his body language tense and animated. Danny said he was coming over and he was bringing some equipment. He said the equipment might help us find out what really happened to her grandmother's guitar. After hanging up, Maya sat on her bed, surrounded by the fragments of her musical life. She picked up the small dragon inlay, running her thumb across its smooth surface. Her grandmother had told her once that dragons were symbols of strength, of the power to overcome any obstacle. They were also symbols of protection, guardians who watched over those who couldn't protect themselves. Maya had spent 3 years learning to be small, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace for her mother's sake. She'd watched Rick slowly take over their lives with the patience of water wearing away stone. Always reasonable, always justified, never technically crossing any lines that couldn't be explained away. But this felt different. This felt personal. This felt like a message, a deliberate destruction of the one thing that connected her to her identity, her heritage, her dreams. And if Rick thought she would accept his version of events, that she would let this become another family secret buried under forced smiles and uncomfortable silence, then he had seriously underestimated the granddaughter of a woman who had refused to let anyone silence her songs. The broken guitar lay before her like evidence, each piece a testimony to something that went beyond an accident. Maya closed her fingers around the dragon, feeling its edges press into her palm, and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what the camera really saw. And she was going to make sure everyone else saw it too. Maya's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., 30 minutes before Rick's daily routine began. She'd memorized his schedule over the past 3 years. Shower at 6, coffee and news until 6:30, out the door by 7:15 for his morning jog around the neighborhood. Her mother would sleep until 7, emerging just in time to make Rick's breakfast and pack his lunch with the devotion of someone trying to prove their worth through acts of service. She dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, pulling on jeans and a hoodie, slipping her feet into worn sneakers that wouldn't squeak against the hardwood floors. The pieces of her grandmother's guitar sat on her desk like artifacts from a crime scene, each fragment telling a story she was only beginning to understand. Maya had always been an early riser, a habit inherited from her grandmother who believed the morning hours belonged to dreamers and truth seekers. "The world is quiet then," she used to say, her accented English wrapping around the words like silk. "Quiet enough to hear your own heart speak." This morning, Maya needed to hear more than her heart. She needed to understand the architecture of her own life, the careful construction of normalcy that had been built around Rick's presence. She made her way downstairs, avoiding the third step that creaked and the loose floorboard near the kitchen entrance. The living room looked different in the early morning light. Without the afternoon sun to soften its edges, the space felt sterile, carefully curated. Rick's influence was everywhere. The leather furniture that had replaced her mother's comfortable fabric couch, the abstract art that had displaced family photos, the entertainment center that showcased his sound system while hiding away the books that Linda used to leave scattered on every surface. Maya stood where her guitar had been destroyed, trying to recreate the scene Rick had described. He claims he'd been backing up with a bookshelf, but the nearest bookshelf was built into the wall, immovable. The other furniture in the room was arranged in a deliberate pattern that would make accidental collisions nearly impossible. Everything in Rick's world had its place, its purpose, its perfect positioning. She looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. Rick had installed it at eye level, claiming it provided the best coverage of the room's entry points. But Maya noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. The angle was wrong for monitoring break-ins. Instead, it was perfectly positioned to observe the couch where she usually sat to play guitar, the window seat where she sometimes practiced in the afternoons, the area where she'd found the destroyed instrument. The camera hadn't been installed to watch for intruders. It had been installed to watch her. Maya's phone vibrated with a text from Arya. Coffee and moral support in 20 minutes. Danny's bringing the text cavalry. Arya Patel had been Maya's best friend since middle school, the kind of person who showed up without being asked and asked questions without being invited. Her parents owned the Indian restaurant where Maya worked weekends, and Arya had inherited their fierce loyalty and protective instincts. When Maya needed an ally, Arya appeared. When Maya needed space, Arya provided it. When Maya needed someone to believe her when no one else would, Arya never hesitated. She slipped out the back door and walked to the corner of Maple Street where Dunkin' Donuts had become their unofficial headquarters for teenage crisis management. Arya was already there, her long black hair pulled back in a messy bun, her dark eyes serious above a large coffee cup. "Show me," Arya said without preamble. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she had taken of the guitar fragments. Each image told the same story. Deliberate destruction, careful placement, intentional devastation. The break in the neck was too clean, too precise to be accidental. The strings had been cut, not snapped from impact. "That bastard," Arya whispered, her voice carrying the particular venom reserved for those who hurt people she loved. "That absolute bastard." Danny arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the kind of focused expression that meant business. He was tall and lean, with gentle hands that understood the delicate relationship between technology and truth. His family had emigrated from Mexico when he was 8, and he'd learned early that sometimes you had to work twice as hard to be heard, to be believed, to be taken seriously. "Okay," he said, settling into the booth beside them. "I did some research on the Morrison security system. It's a high-end setup, the kind usually installed in commercial buildings, not suburban homes. 16 cameras, motion sensors, audio recording capability, and yes, cloud backup with automatic deletion after 90 days. Maya leaned forward. "Can we access it?" "Not legally, but here's the thing. If Rick manually deleted footage from yesterday, there would be a log entry showing the deletion, the timestamp, and which user account performed the action. Those logs are stored separately from the video files and are much harder to delete without leaving traces." Arya stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "What if we could get physical access to the system? Maya lives there." "The server is probably in Rick's home office. He keeps it locked, says it's for work confidentiality. But I know where he hides the key." Danny shook his head. "Even if we could access the server, we'd need his login credentials. And if we got caught..." "If we get caught, what's he going to do? Break another guitar? Ground me? Kick me out? He's already made it clear I'm living there on his terms." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, considering the implications.
Maya thought about the last 3 years, the slow erosion of her sense of home, the way Rick's presence had gradually displaced not just furniture, but comfort, safety, belonging. She thought about her mother's careful navigation of Rick's moods, the way Linda had learned to apologize for things that weren't her fault, to minimize herself, to avoid conflict. "There's something else," Maya said quietly. "This isn't the first time something of mine has been damaged or gone missing. Remember when I couldn't find my acceptance letter from the summer music camp?" Arya nodded. "You looked everywhere. Rick said maybe you'd misplaced it. And my sheet music that went missing right before the spring recital. And my favorite pick, the one my grandmother gave me, that just disappeared from my guitar case." The pattern was becoming clear. Each incident small enough to be explained away, frequent enough to create a sense of instability. He's been doing this for months, maybe years. Danny opened his laptop and began typing. There might be another way. Every time the system detects motion, it creates a thumbnail image before it starts recording. Those thumbnails are stored in a different location and aren't usually deleted when footage is manually removed. If I could access those? Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Where are you, sweetheart? Rick made pancakes." The domestic normalcy of the message felt surreal against the backdrop of their conversation. She could picture Rick in the kitchen, performing the role of stepfather, creating the illusion of a family breakfast while her mother busied herself setting the perfect table. "I have to go. But Danny, whatever you need from me to make this work, I'm in." "Maya," Arya caught her arm as she stood, "are you sure about this? Once we start pulling at this thread, we can't put it back."
Maya looked at her best friend, seeing the concern and love in her eyes. Arya had been there through everything. The divorce, the adjustment to Rick, the careful balance of trying to maintain peace while feeling increasingly displaced in her own life. Arya had never pushed, never demanded Maya choose sides, but she'd also never pretended that Rick's behavior was normal or acceptable. "I'm tired of being afraid in my own house," Maya said. "I'm tired of making myself small so everyone else can be comfortable. My grandmother didn't cross an ocean and start over in a new country so her granddaughter could be silent when someone breaks her guitar and lies about it." The drive home took 12 minutes, but Maya spent the time traveling much further, back through 3 years of small compromises and subtle adjustments, through months of learning to read Rick's moods and navigate around his expectations. She remembered the early days when he'd seemed charming, attentive to her mother, making an effort to include Maya in conversations and activities. But there had been signs even then, moments that felt off balance, comments that seemed designed to test her boundaries. He'd made jokes about her music being too ethnic, suggested she might want to learn more mainstream songs. He'd questioned the time she spent practicing, implying it was selfish to make noise when others were trying to relax. Each incident had been small, easy to dismiss, wrapped in humor or concern that made objections seem unreasonable. But together, they formed a pattern of someone systematically undermining her confidence, her connection to her heritage, her sense of belonging in her own space. Maya pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment in her mother's Honda, looking at the house that no longer felt like home. Rick's SUV dominated the 2-car garage, forcing Linda to park outside in all weather. His golf clubs occupied the storage space where Maya's bicycle used to live. His preferences had quietly colonized every room, every decision, every family dynamic. She found them in the kitchen, Rick standing at the stove with a spatula in hand, her mother setting out plates and syrup with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for entertaining guests. They both looked up when she entered, and Maya noticed the way her mother's eyes searched her face for signs of trouble, for emotions that might disrupt the carefully maintained peace. "There she is," Rick said, his smile bright and practiced. "Perfect timing. Hope you're hungry." The pancakes were perfectly round, golden brown, arranged on the plate with geometric precision. Rick had always been proud of his cooking, the way he could follow recipes to the letter and produce consistent results.
But there was something performative about it, as if he were demonstrating his competence rather than nourishing his family. Maya sat at the table, accepting the plate her mother placed before her. Linda's hands shook slightly as she poured orange juice, and Maya noticed the way she avoided eye contact, focusing instead on the domestic tasks that filled the silence. "Sleep okay?" Rick asked, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "I know yesterday was challenging." The word choice was interesting. Challenging, as if the destruction of her grandmother's guitar was a natural disaster rather than a deliberate action. Maya cut into her pancakes, buying herself time to choose her words carefully. "I've been thinking about what happened, about the accident." She watched Rick's face, looking for the micro-expressions Danny had taught her to notice. Rick's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. It's important to process these things. Grief can be complicated. Grief, as if her guitar had died of natural causes rather than violence, as if her loss were an internal emotional state rather than the result of his deliberate actions.
I was wondering if we could look at the security footage together, Maya continued, keeping her voice level and curious. I know the camera was malfunctioning, but maybe there's something we could see. It might help with the insurance claim. The silence that followed felt electric. Linda stopped chewing, her eyes darting between Maya and Rick. Rick set down his fork with deliberate precision, his movements controlled and careful. "Maya, sweetheart, I told you the camera wasn't working properly. There's nothing to see." "But you haven't actually checked, have you? I mean, maybe it caught something before it malfunctioned. And if there's any chance of getting compensation for the guitar, the insurance won't cover it anyway," Rick said, his voice carrying a new edge. "It's a personal property claim, and the deductible is higher than what that old thing was worth." That old thing was worth more than money. It was worth— "Maya," her mother's voice cut across the table like a blade. "Rick is just trying to help. He feels terrible about what happened. We all do." The plea in Linda's voice was unmistakable. Keep the peace, don't push, accept the story, and move on. It was the same tone she'd used during the divorce, when Maya had asked too many questions about why her father had left, when she'd pushed for truth instead of accepting comfortable fiction. Maya looked at her mother and saw 3 years of practice at conflict avoidance, at choosing temporary calm over uncomfortable truth. She saw a woman who had learned to negotiate her own needs downward, to accept less and less until she'd forgotten what enough actually looked like. "Okay," Maya said finally. "I understand." But she didn't understand, not really. She understood that Rick was lying, that her mother was enabling the lie, that the truth was considered less important than the preservation of domestic tranquility. She understood that her grief, her loss, her questions were inconveniences to be managed rather than legitimate responses to injustice. What she was beginning to understand was that sometimes the people who claim to love you will choose their own comfort over your truth. Sometimes keeping the peace means silencing the very people who most need to be heard. Rick's smile returned, warm and paternal. "I'm proud of you for being so mature about this, Maya. It shows real character." Character. The word sat in Maya's throat like a stone. She finished her breakfast in silence, made appreciative noises about the pancakes, helped her mother clear the table with the choreographed efficiency of a family that had learned to perform normalcy rather than live it. As she headed upstairs to get ready for school, Maya heard Rick's voice drift up from the kitchen. "She's handling this really well. I think she's finally starting to mature, to understand how families work." Maya stood on the landing listening to her mother's murmured agreement and felt something crystallize inside her chest. Rick thought he had won. He thought his story had been accepted, his authority established, his version of events sealed into family history. He was wrong. In her room, Maya carefully gathered the pieces of her grandmother's guitar and placed them in a cardboard box. Each fragment went in with reverence, with promise, with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for relics and evidence. She wrote a note and tucked it under the dragon inlay. "For Grandma Papa, who taught me that silence is only golden when it's chosen. The truth will sing louder than lies."
Her phone buzzed with a message from Danny. Found something in the system thumbnails. Meet after school. Bring tissues. Maya stared at the message, feeling her heart rate quicken. She had asked for truth, and truth was coming. But she was beginning to understand that truth, like music, could be beautiful and devastating in equal measure. Some songs changed you in the singing. Some truths changed everything in the knowing. She was about to find out which kind of truth she'd been living with. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Patterson Music's parking lot as Maya walked toward the small shop that had been her second home since childhood. The bell above the door chimed its familiar welcome, and she breathed in the scent of wood polish, new strings, and the indefinable essence of instruments waiting to be played. Danny looked up from behind the counter where he was restringing a Telecaster, his expression serious. "Maya, you ready for this?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for anything anymore. The last 3 hours at school had passed in a blur of concerned glances from Arya, whispered conversations with teachers who'd noticed her distraction, and the careful performance of normalcy that had become her specialty. "Show me," she said. Danny led her to the back office, where his laptop was connected to an external monitor. The screen showed a grid of thumbnail images, each one time-stamped marked with yesterday's date. Maya could see her living room from the camera's perspective, frozen moments that told a story she was finally going to understand. "I managed to access the thumbnail cache through a back door in the system's diagnostic mode," Danny explained, his fingers moving across the keyboard. "Rick deleted the main footage, but he didn't know about the thumbnails. They're automatically generated every 30 seconds when motion is detected." The first few thumbnails showed an empty living room, afternoon light streaming through windows. Then Maya appeared in the frame, carrying her guitar, settling onto the couch in her usual practice spot. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., 2:48 p.m., 2:49 p.m. "That's me leaving for my shift at the restaurant," Maya said, recognizing the moment when she'd carefully placed the guitar in its stand before grabbing her work apron. "I left at 2:52. Danny clicked to the next sequence. 3:15 p.m. showed the empty living room again. 3:16 p.m. showed Rick entering the frame, moving purposefully toward the guitar stand. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "He's not carrying any furniture," she whispered. 3:17 p.m., Rick picking up the guitar, examining it. 3:18 p.m., Rick raising the instrument above his head. 3:19 p.m., the moment of impact, Rick bringing the guitar down against the coffee table's edge with deliberate force. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. In the grainy thumbnail image, she could see Rick's face clearly. No accident, no surprise, no regret. His expression was focused, determined, almost satisfied as he destroyed her most precious possession. "There's more," Danny said quietly. The next thumbnail showed Rick gathering the larger pieces, arranging them carefully on the floor. Then he disappeared from view for several minutes. When he reappeared at 3:31 p.m., he was carrying a bookshelf from the garage, the same bookshelf he'd claimed to be moving when the accident occurred. "He staged it," Maya breathed. "He broke my guitar, then set up the scene to match his story." Danny nodded grimly. "And look at this, 3:45 p.m. The final sequence showed Rick at the security system's control panel, his finger pressing buttons, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He spent 4 minutes at the panel before the thumbnails ended abruptly. "That's when he deleted the main footage and disabled the camera," Danny explained. "But he didn't know the diagnostic system keeps its own backup files. He's good with basic security systems, but he's not a tech expert." Maya stared at the screen, feeling the last 3 years of her life rearrange themselves like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. The missing sheet music, the lost acceptance letter, the mysterious damage to her other belongings, all of it part of a pattern of deliberate sabotage designed to undermine her confidence, her opportunities, her connection to music. "Can we download these images?" she asked. "Already done. They're saved to 3 different cloud services under my account. But Maya, what are you going to do with them?"
She thought about her mother making pancakes this morning, the careful choreography of domestic peace, the way Linda had learned to smooth over every rough edge in service of maintaining Rick's vision of family harmony. She thought about all the time she'd swallowed her questions, accepted explanations that felt wrong, chosen silence over confrontation. "I'm going to show my mother," Maya said. "She deserves to know who she married." Danny's expression was troubled. "Are you sure she's going to believe it? Sometimes people see what they want to see, especially when the truth is this hard to accept." Maya had been asking herself the same question. Her mother had invested 3 years in building a life with Rick, had chosen his stability over the uncertainty of single parenthood, had convinced herself that his presence was worth the gradual erosion of their previous closeness. Accepting the truth about Rick meant accepting that she'd been living with someone capable of deliberate cruelty, someone who would destroy a teenager's most precious possession out of what? Jealousy? Control? Simple meanness? "I have to try," Maya said. "She's my mother. She loves me. When she sees what really happened? And if she doesn't believe it? If she chooses Rick's version of events over the evidence?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Maya to confront possibilities she'd been avoiding. What if her mother's need for Rick's financial stability was stronger than her commitment to Maya's well-being? What if Linda had become so invested in the fiction of their happy, blended family that she couldn't afford to acknowledge the truth? Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Working late tonight. Rick's making dinner. Please be nice to him, sweetheart. He's been so upset about the guitar." Upset about the guitar. Maya stared at the message, feeling a familiar anger build in her chest. Rick was upset, not guilty, not apologetic, not responsible. Upset, as if the guitar had broken itself and inconvenienced him with the resulting drama. "I need those images sent to my phone," Maya said, her voice steady. "All of them." Danny hesitated. "Maya, think about this carefully. Once you show these to your mother, there's no going back. Your family is going to implode." "My family imploded 3 years ago. We've just been pretending otherwise." The drive home took 23 minutes through residential streets lined with perfect lawns and houses that glowed with warm light from within. Maya had always loved this time of day, the hour when families gathered for dinner, when homes became sanctuaries, when the chaos of the world gave way to the comfort of belonging. But as she pulled into her driveway, Maya realized she'd been mourning something that never actually existed. The sense of home she'd lost hadn't been destroyed by Rick's arrival, it had been revealed as an illusion by his presence. The comfort, the safety, the unconditional acceptance she'd believed in had been conditional all along, dependent on her willingness to be small, quiet, grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection were offered. Rick's SUV dominated the driveway, and Maya could see him through the kitchen window, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who belonged. Her mother's car wasn't there. She was working another double shift at the medical office, earning money to support a household where her own daughter increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest. Maya sat in her car for several minutes, staring at the house that had been her home for 17 years, trying to memorize the way it looked before everything changed. Because everything was about to change. The truth had a way of rearranging reality, of making it impossible to return to comfortable fictions once the light had been turned on. She found Rick in the kitchen, wearing an apron that said, "World's Greatest Dad." A Father's Day gift from Linda that had always felt aspirational rather than accurate. He was preparing what looked like a gourmet meal, the counter covered with ingredients for homemade pasta, and what appeared to be a complex sauce involving multiple pans and precise timing. "Perfect timing," Rick said without looking up from his chopping. "I'm making your favorite, well, what I think might be your favorite, chicken piccata with angel hair pasta. Your mom mentioned you liked Italian food." Maya stood in the doorway, watching this performance of domestic care, knowing what she now knew about the hands that were so carefully julienning vegetables. Those same hands had destroyed her grandmother's guitar with deliberate precision, had spent time staging the scene to support his lie, had violated her trust in the most calculated way possible. "That's thoughtful," she managed, her voice neutral.
I wanted to do something special. Yesterday was, well, it was terrible for all of us. I keep thinking about that guitar, about how much it meant to you. Rick's voice carried the perfect note of regret, the kind of practiced emotion that probably served him well in his insurance career. I know I can't replace what it meant to you, but I've been looking online at some options. There are some beautiful new guitars that might— Rick, Maya interrupted. Can we talk? He looked up then, his expression shifting from domestic focus to mild concern. Of course, sweetheart. Everything okay? The endorment hit her like a slap. Sweetheart. The same word her mother used, the same tone of affection, but coming from Rick, it felt like a costume he was wearing, a role he was playing in the ongoing performance of their blended family. Maya pulled out her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The thumbnail images were queued up, ready to shatter the careful fiction Rick had constructed. She thought about all the ways this conversation could go, all the potential responses and deflections and justifications he might offer. I want to show you something, she said. Rick set down his knife and turned to face her fully, his expression attentive and patient. He was a handsome man, Maya had to admit, the kind of reassuring presence that made people trust him with their insurance policies, their financial planning, their futures. He looked like someone who would never lie, never deliberately hurt a teenager, never destroy something precious out of petty cruelty. But appearances, Maya was learning, could be weapons in the right hands. She held up her phone, showing him the first thumbnail image, Rick entering the living room at 3:16 p.m., moving purposefully toward her guitar. The change in Rick's expression was instantaneous and complete. The concerned stepfather vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. His eyes flicked from the phone to Maya's face, and she saw him rapidly processing this new reality, this unexpected complication to his perfectly crafted narrative. Where did you get this? His voice was different now, sharper, stripped of its usual warmth.
From the security system you installed. The one you said was malfunctioning. Maya swiped to the next image, Rick lifting the guitar above his head. The one that recorded everything. Rick's jaw tightened. Maya, you don't understand what you're looking at. The timestamp is wrong. The context is— The timestamp is accurate to the second. And here's the context. She swiped through the sequence. The moment of destruction, Rick arranging the pieces, Rick staging the scene with the bookshelf, Rick at the control panel deleting the main footage. With each image, Rick's mask slipped further away, revealing something underneath that made Maya's skin crawl. This was what her mother lived with, slept next to, trusted with their future. This was the man who had convinced Linda to let him into their home, their family, their lives. You broke my grandmother's guitar on purpose, Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. You destroyed it. Then you lied about it. Then you convinced my mother to lie about it too. Rick stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. How much did she know? Who else had seen the images? What were the potential consequences of different responses? When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, reasonable, almost gentle. Maya, I understand you're upset. Losing that guitar was traumatic, and sometimes when we're grieving, we look for someone to blame. It's natural to want to make sense of loss, to find meaning in random events. The gaslighting was smooth, professional, delivered with the kind of authority that made people doubt their own perceptions. Maya had watched Rick use this technique on her mother countless times, seen Linda second-guess her own memories and instincts when they conflicted with Rick's version of reality. This isn't grief. This is evidence. Evidence of what? A few blurry security photos taken out of context? Maya, honey, you're seeing what you want to see because accepting that accidents happen is harder than believing someone is out to get you. Maya felt something snap inside her chest.
The casual dismissal, the condescending tone, the way he was trying to make her feel crazy for believing her own eyes, it was everything that was wrong with the last 3 years crystallized into one moment of perfect clarity. "Stop," she said, her voice rising. "Stop lying to me. Stop lying to my mother. Stop pretending to be something you're not." Rick's expression hardened. "Lower your voice. Your mother will be home soon, and she doesn't need to deal with teenage hysteria on top of everything else." Teenage hysteria? Is that what you're going to call it when I show these pictures to Mom? When I tell her what you really did? The silence that followed was electric with threat. Rick stepped closer, and Maya suddenly became aware of their size difference, of how alone they were in the house, of how isolated she had become from any adult who might believe her over him. "Maya," Rick said, "I think you need to be very careful about the stories you tell. Very careful about creating drama where none needs to exist. Your mother has worked hard to build a stable life, a secure future. She deserves peace, not chaos created by a teenager who can't accept that accidents sometimes happen." The threat was implicit but clear. Challenge his authority, disrupt his narrative, and face the consequences. Maya thought about her mother's careful navigation of Rick's moods, the way Linda had learned to apologize for things that weren't her fault, to minimize conflict at any cost. Had Rick made similar threats to her? Had he used Linda's desire for stability as leverage to ensure her silence? "She deserves the truth," she said.
The truth? Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that you're a 17-year-old girl with an overactive imagination and a tendency toward drama. The truth is that your mother chose me, chose this life, chose stability over chaos. The truth is that accidents happen, and sometimes we have to accept loss and move on instead of creating conspiracy theories to avoid dealing with reality. Maya stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man her mother had married. Not the charming insurance salesman who brought flowers and made pancakes, but someone capable of deliberate cruelty, systematic manipulation, and casual gaslighting when his carefully constructed image was threatened. "I'm showing her the pictures," Maya said. Rick's smile was cold and predatory. "Go ahead. Show her blurry security images and tell her wild stories about intentional destruction. See which one of us she believes. See who she chooses when forced to pick sides." The challenge hung in the air between them, and Maya realized that Rick was confident. Not just confident, but certain. He knew something about her mother's psychology, about Linda's investment in their relationship, about the mechanisms of denial and self-preservation that would make her choose comfort over truth. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Running even later, emergency at work. Rick, thank you for making dinner. Maya, please help clean up. See you both around 10. Rick glanced at the phone and smiled. "Looks like we have some time to talk about this properly, to really think through the consequences of the choices you're considering." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She was alone in the house with someone who had deliberately destroyed her most precious possession, who had lied about it without hesitation, who was now threatening her in the careful language of plausible deniability. "I'm going to Arya's," she said, backing toward the kitchen door. "No," Rick said, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge. "You're going to sit down, and we're going to have a conversation about family loyalty, about the difference between truth and troublemaking, about what happens to teenage girls who can't learn to show proper respect and gratitude." Maya's hand found the door handle, but Rick moved faster than she'd expected, stepping between her and the exit. He didn't touch her, didn't make any overtly threatening gesture, but his presence filled the doorway like a wall. "Maya," he said, his voice taking on the tone he used when explaining insurance policies to confused customers, "I understand you're upset. I understand you want someone to blame for what happened to your guitar, but creating family conflict, telling stories that could hurt your mother, spreading lies about someone who has only tried to take care of you, that's not going to bring your guitar back.
That's only going to create problems for everyone. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought about the neighbors, all of whom considered Rick a model citizen, a successful businessman, a devoted stepfather. She thought about her mother's coworkers who envied Linda's stable marriage to such a reliable man. She thought about the careful construction of Rick's public image, the way he'd positioned himself as the responsible adult in their family dynamic. "People won't believe you," Rick said, as if reading her thoughts. A troubled teenager making wild accusations against her stepfather? A girl who's clearly grieving, clearly emotional, clearly struggling with the normal challenges of a blended family? Maya, honey, you need to think about how this looks from the outside. The gaslighting was more sophisticated now, layered with concern and manipulation, designed to make her doubt not just her perceptions, but her credibility, her worth, her right to be believed. Maya realized that Rick had probably been planning for this moment, preparing for the possibility that his carefully constructed facade might crack, that someone might see through the performance of domestic harmony.
But he hadn't counted on the security system keeping backup files. He hadn't counted on Danny's technical expertise. He hadn't counted on Maya being smart enough, angry enough, and desperate enough to dig for the truth. "I have proof," Maya said, holding up her phone like a talisman. "You have blurry photos that could be interpreted in multiple ways," Rick corrected. "Photos that don't show what you think they show, taken by a system that you accessed without permission. Photos that could be seen as evidence of your obsession with creating drama rather than evidence of any wrongdoing on my part." Maya felt the walls closing in, the careful trap Rick had been building around her for 3 years, finally springing shut. He had isolated her from her mother, undermined her credibility, positioned himself as the reasonable adult dealing with a difficult teenager. Even her evidence could be turned against her, framed as the desperate fabrications of someone looking for attention or trying to avoid responsibility for her own problems. But then she thought about her grandmother, who had faced down immigration officials and hostile employers and neighbors who thought Chinese women should be quiet and grateful and invisible. Popo had never been quiet. She had never accepted less than she deserved. She had never let anyone convince her that her truth was less important than their comfort. "Let me out," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear. Rick studied her for a moment, then stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Of course, I would never prevent you from leaving. I'm not the kind of person who would ever hurt you or hold you against your will. I think it's important that you remember that." The implicit message was clear. No one would believe her if she claimed otherwise. Rick was too smart, too careful, too aware of how these situations played out to leave any obvious evidence of intimidation or threat. Maya walked past him, feeling his presence like a weight against her back, and headed for the front door. As she reached for the handle, Rick's voice followed her. "Maya, think carefully about what you're planning to do. Think about your mother's happiness. Think about the life she's built. Think about whether destroying all of that is really worth pursuing your need to be right about something that's already over and done with." Maya paused with her hand on the door, recognizing the final layer of Rick's manipulation. He was making her responsible for her mother's well-being, for the stability of their family, for the consequences of revealing his true nature. If she spoke up, she would be the one causing pain, creating chaos, destroying happiness. Rick would remain the victim of a troubled teenager's wild accusations, his reputation intact, his manipulation invisible to anyone who hadn't experienced it directly. Maya drove to Arya's house with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the thumbnail images burning like evidence in her phone, and the weight of Rick's threats heavy in her chest. She was about to find out whether her mother's love was stronger than her need for security, whether the truth was more important than the illusion of domestic peace. She was about to find out what kind of family she really had. Arya's family lived in a warm, chaotic house where the scents of cardamom and cumin mixed with the sounds of Bollywood music and heated discussions about everything from politics to cricket scores. Maya had always found refuge here, in the embrace of a family that argued loudly and loved fiercely, where emotions were expressed rather than managed, where conflict was seen as a path to understanding rather than something to be avoided at all costs. Mrs. Patel took one look at Maya's face and immediately began preparing tea, the kind of strong, spiced chai that could heal heartbreak and strengthen resolve in equal measure. Mr. Patel, who was watching cricket highlights on his tablet, looked up and simply said, "Arya is upstairs. Go."
Maya found her best friend in her bedroom, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship applications. Arya took one look at Maya's expression and swept everything off her bed, creating space for the kind of conversation that required tissue boxes and absolute privacy. "Show me," Arya said, echoing Danny's words from earlier. Maya pulled out her phone and shared the thumbnail images, watching Arya's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and a fury so pure it was almost beautiful. When the slideshow was finished, Arya sat back against her pillows and said exactly what Maya had been thinking, but hadn't been able to articulate. "That motherfucker has been planning this for months." The profanity felt cathartic, a perfect expression of the rage that had been building in Maya's chest like pressure in a volcano. Rick hadn't destroyed her guitar in a moment of anger or frustration. He had systematically undermined her for years, building toward this moment of deliberate cruelty, this calculated destruction of something that connected her to her heritage and her dreams. "He threatened me," Maya said, and found herself telling Arya everything. The confrontation in the kitchen, Rick's careful manipulation, the way he'd positioned himself between her and the door, the implicit warnings about her credibility and her mother's happiness. Arya listened with the focused intensity of someone gathering intelligence for war. When Maya finished, Arya was quiet for several minutes, processing the information with the kind of strategic thinking that had made her student body president and would probably make her a formidable lawyer someday. "Okay," Arya said finally. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay here tonight. My parents will call your mom and explain that you needed some space after yesterday's trauma, that we're having a therapeutic sleepover with ice cream and terrible movies. They'll make it sound nurturing and healing, exactly the kind of thing your mom will think is healthy." Maya nodded, grateful for the Patel family's ability to create safe harbor without asking too many questions. "Tomorrow morning," Arya continued, "you're going to show your mother those images. Not alone, not in your house where Rick can control the narrative, but somewhere public where she can process this information without pressure to respond in any particular way. What if she doesn't believe me? What if she chooses Rick?" Arya reached over and took Maya's hands in hers, "And then you'll know where you stand and you can make decisions based on reality instead of hope. Maya, I love your mom, but she's been enabling Rick's behavior for 3 years. She's chosen comfort over truth, stability over your well-being. At some point, you have to stop protecting her from the consequences of her choices." The words hit Maya like ice water, forcing her to confront possibilities she'd been avoiding. What if her mother did choose Rick? What if Linda's investment in their relationship was stronger than her commitment to Maya's truth? What if Maya was about to become homeless, familyless, completely alone in the world? "My parents have already discussed it," Arya said quietly. "If things go badly tomorrow, if your mom chooses Rick over you, you have a place here for as long as you need it, through graduation, through college applications, through whatever comes next." Maya felt tears she'd been holding back for hours finally break free. The Patel family barely knew her story, but they were already offering her sanctuary, already preparing to catch her if her own family let her fall. It was a kindness so pure it made Rick's calculated cruelty seem even more monstrous by contrast.
"There's something else," Maya said through her tears. "Danny found more than just the thumbnails. He thinks Rick has been monitoring my online activity, tracking my social media, maybe even reading my emails. The level of surveillance in that house goes way beyond normal security." Arya's expression darkened. That explains how he always seemed to know about your plans, your applications, your opportunities. Maya, he's been sabotaging you systematically. The missing acceptance letter, the damaged sheet music, the broken guitar, none of it was random. He's been trying to isolate you, to make you dependent on his approval, to crush your dreams before they could threaten his control. Maya thought about the last 3 years, all the small disappointments and setbacks that had seemed like bad luck or her own failures. Rick had been there for each one, offering comfort and support while secretly orchestrating the very problems he was helping her solve. It was manipulation so sophisticated it made her feel sick to think about. Why? Maya asked. Why would someone do that to a kid? What did I ever do to him? You existed, Arya said simply. You were a reminder that your mother had a life before him, relationships that didn't center around his needs. You had talents and dreams and connections to your heritage that he couldn't control or claim credit for. Some people can't stand sharing space with someone else's light. Maya's phone buzzed with a call from her mother. She stared at the screen, knowing that Linda was probably worried, probably expecting Maya to come home and help clean up from Rick's elaborate dinner, probably ready to deliver another gentle lecture about gratitude and family harmony. Don't answer, Arya advised. Let my mom talk to her. Give yourself tonight to figure out exactly what you want to say tomorrow. Mrs. Patel appeared in the doorway, as if summoned, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of chai and a plate of samosas that could solve most of the world's problems. She settled onto the edge of Arya's bed with the comfortable authority of someone who had navigated teenage crises for decades. Your mother is worried, she said to Maya without preamble. I told her you needed some time to process yesterday's loss, that grief works differently for different people. She seemed to understand. Maya nodded, grateful for Mrs. Patel's ability to create plausible cover stories that protected everyone's dignity. I also told her that in our culture, when something precious is destroyed, we take time to honor what was lost before we move forward, that rushing to replace something meaningful shows disrespect to its memory. Mrs. Patel's dark eyes were gentle, but knowing. She said she hadn't thought about it that way. Maya realized that Mrs. Patel understood exactly what was happening, probably understood from the moment Maya had walked through their door looking like a refugee from her own life. The Patel family had immigrated from India 20 years ago, and they knew what it looked like when someone's identity was under attack, when cultural connections were being severed, when a person was being systematically stripped of everything that made them who they were. Thank you, Maya said, meaning more than just the temporary sanctuary. Mrs. Patel nodded and stood to leave, pausing at the door. Maya, Betta, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable someone else's denial. Truth-telling is an act of love, even when it's painful. After she left, Maya and Arya spent the evening planning Maya's conversation with her mother, role-playing different scenarios, preparing for various responses and reactions. They practiced staying calm in the face of denial, standing firm against manipulation, speaking truth with compassion, but without compromise. As the night wore on, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something else, a sense of rightness, of alignment with values that went deeper than family peace or domestic harmony. Her grandmother had faced down immigration officials who tried to separate her from her children. She had stood up to employers who wanted to pay her less because of her accent. She had refused to be grateful for scraps when she deserved full meals. Maya was her grandmother's granddaughter. She would not be silenced by someone who destroyed guitars and called it love. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of California day that made everything seem possible. Maya woke up in Arya's guest bed, feeling more rested than she had in months, as if the simple act of sleeping somewhere she felt safe had restored something essential in her spirit. She borrowed clothes from Arya, jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her feel confident without trying too hard.
She braided her long black hair in the style her grandmother had taught her, weaving strength into each strand. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not Rick's inconvenient stepdaughter, but Popo's granddaughter, someone worthy of truth and justice, and love that didn't require grateful silence in return. Mrs. Patel made them breakfast. Parathas stuffed with spiced potatoes, yogurt with fresh fruit, chai that tasted like courage and community. As Maya ate, she felt the strength of this family's acceptance, filling the spaces that 3 years of Rick's manipulation had hollowed out. "Ready?" Arya asked. Maya nodded, clutching her phone with its devastating evidence, carrying the weight of truth that would either free her family from Rick's carefully constructed lies or cost her the only mother she had. Ready. They drove to Sunset Coffee, the same shop where Maya had planned to perform her grandmother's lullaby before Rick had destroyed her guitar and her dreams along with it. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to shatter her mother's illusions in the same place where she'd hoped to honor her grandmother's memory through music. Linda was already there when they arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a large coffee cup. She looked tired, worried, older than her 42 years. Maya felt a stab of guilt, knowing that she was about to add to her mother's burdens, then reminded herself that truth was not a burden. Lies were the burden, and she was about to help her mother set it down. "Hi, sweetheart," Linda said, standing to hug Maya. "Are you feeling better? Mrs. Patel said you needed some space to process things." Maya hugged her mother back, breathing in the familiar scent of Linda's perfume, mixed with the stress sweat that had become her constant companion since Rick had moved in. When had her mother started smelling like anxiety? When had Linda's hugs started feeling like apologies? "Mom," Maya said as they settled into the booth, "I need to show you something about what really happened to my guitar." Linda's expression immediately became guarded, the careful neutrality she learned to adopt whenever conflict threatened. "Maya, honey, I thought we'd moved past this. Rick feels terrible about the accident, and dwelling on it isn't going to—" It wasn't an accident. Maya pulled out her phone, her heart hammering. "I have proof." She showed her mother the thumbnail images, watching Linda's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. When the slideshow finished, Linda sat back against the booth's worn vinyl, her coffee forgotten, her carefully constructed world cracking like ice under pressure. "I don't understand," Linda whispered. "The timestamps, but Rick said he was moving furniture. He staged that after he broke the guitar. Mom, he destroyed it on purpose. Then he lied to both of us about what happened. He deleted the main footage from the security system, but he didn't know about the backup files."
Maya watched her mother's face, seeing the war between denial and acceptance playing out in real time. Linda had invested 3 years in believing Rick's version of reality, in trusting his explanations, in accepting his authority over their family's narrative. Admitting that he had lied about this meant admitting that he could lie about anything, that nothing in their carefully constructed life could be trusted. "There has to be an explanation," Linda said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe he was angry about something else and he made a mistake, and then he was embarrassed. "Mom." Maya reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "Look at his face in these pictures. This wasn't a mistake or an accident or a moment of anger. This was deliberate. He planned it, he executed it, and then he manipulated both of us into accepting his story." Linda stared at the phone screen, and Maya watched her mother's face as 3 years of careful denial began to crumble. All the small incidents that hadn't quite made sense, all the explanations that had felt wrong but been accepted for the sake of peace, all the times Rick had positioned himself as the reasonable adult dealing with an unreasonable teenager,
All of it was being re-examined in light of this new evidence. "Oh, God," Linda breathed. "Oh, God, Maya, what have I done?" The pain in her mother's voice was almost unbearable, but Maya forced herself to continue. "It's not just the guitar, Mom. Danny thinks Rick has been monitoring my online activity, tracking my emails, sabotaging my opportunities for months. The missing acceptance letter, the damaged sheet music, all the times I couldn't find important documents. I think he's been doing this to me for years." Linda's hands were shaking now, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the pallor that had taken over her face. "I chose him," she whispered. "I chose him over you. Every time you tried to tell me something felt wrong, every time you seemed uncomfortable or upset, I told you to try harder, to be more grateful, to make more effort." The confession hung between them like a bridge Maya could choose to cross or burn. Her mother was finally acknowledging what Maya had known for years, that Linda had prioritized Rick's comfort over Maya's well-being, had chosen the illusion of stability over her daughter's truth. "Why?" Maya asked, needing to understand. "Why did you choose him?" Linda closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Because I was scared. After your father left, I was so scared of being alone, of not being able to provide for you, of failing as a mother. Rick offered security, stability, a future that felt safe. And when you seemed unhappy, it was easier to believe that you were just adjusting to change than to consider that I might have made a terrible mistake." I felt my own tears starting, but they were different from the frustrated, helpless tears she'd cried for 3 years. These were tears of recognition, of finally being seen and heard and believed by the persons whose opinion mattered most. "I'm sorry," Linda continued, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Maya. I failed you. I let someone hurt you in our own home, and I made you feel like it was your fault for not being grateful enough." Maya reached across the table and took her mother's hands again, feeling the calluses from Linda's double shifts at the medical office, the tension in her fingers from years of typing and filing and trying to keep our lives stable through sheer force of will. "What do we do now?" Maya asked. Linda looked at the phone again, at the evidence of Rick's calculated cruelty, at the proof that their entire life had been built on lies and manipulation. When she looked up, Maya saw something in her mother's eyes that had been missing for 3 years. The fierce protectiveness that had characterized Linda before Rick had convinced her to doubt her own instincts. "Now," Linda said, her voice stronger than it had been in years, "we go home and pack your things, and then we have a conversation with Rick about exactly what kind of man he really is." Maya felt something that had been broken inside her chest begin to heal. Her mother was choosing her. After 3 years of prioritizing peace over truth, Linda was finally ready to fight for her daughter, to face the consequences of Rick's manipulation, and to rebuild their lives on a foundation of honesty instead of convenient fiction.
They sat in the coffee shop for another hour, Linda asking questions and Maya providing answers, both of them examining the last 3 years through this new lens of understanding. Every incident that had seemed like Maya's fault, or Rick's innocent mistake, was revealed as part of a pattern of systematic abuse designed to isolate Maya from her mother, to undermine her confidence, to make her dependent on Rick's approval. "He's going to deny everything," Linda said finally. "He's going to say the photos are taken out of context, that you're being dramatic, that I'm choosing chaos over stability." "I know," Maya said. "Are you ready for that?" Linda looked at her daughter, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Maya had grown taller, her face had matured, her expression had developed the careful guardedness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Linda was looking at a young woman who had survived 3 years of psychological manipulation, while her own mother had chosen comfort over truth. "I'm ready," Linda said. "Maya, I don't know what our life is going to look like after today. I don't know where we'll live or how we'll manage financially. But I know that keeping you safe and believing your truth is more important than any security Rick can offer. Maya felt the last knot of fear in her chest finally begin to loosen. Her mother was choosing love over fear, truth over comfort, Maya's well-being over domestic peace. It was 3 years too late, but it wasn't too late to matter. They drove home together, Linda's ancient Honda following Maya's car through streets that looked the same but felt completely different. Maya was returning to the house that had been her prison, but this time she wasn't going alone. This time, she had her mother as an ally instead of an obstacle. This time, Rick's carefully constructed kingdom was about to fall. Rick's SUV was still in the driveway when they arrived, which Maya had expected. He would be waiting, probably preparing his defense, crafting explanations that would make her evidence seem questionable and her motive suspect. But something had changed in the last hour. Maya was no longer facing him alone. Linda parked behind Rick's vehicle, effectively blocking him in. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. "We do this together," Linda said, her strength carrying a strength Maya hadn't heard in years. They found Rick in his home office, sitting behind the large mahogany desk that had replaced Linda's antique writing table. Multiple monitors displayed what looked like work spreadsheets, but Maya noticed he quickly minimized several windows when they entered. The security system's control panel was open on one screen, and Maya wondered what evidence he might be trying to eliminate even now. "Linda, Maya," Rick said, standing with his practiced smile. "Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the security system settings, trying to see if I can recover any footage from yesterday's malfunction." The lie was smooth, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged, never been caught, never faced consequences for his manipulation. But Maya could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was assessing our mood, their body language, their potential threat level.
"We need to talk," Linda said, and Maya heard something new in her mother's voice. The authority of someone who was done being managed, done accepting explanations that felt wrong, done prioritizing peace over truth. Rick's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Maya pulled out her phone, but Linda stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "I'll handle this," her mother said quietly, and Maya realized that Linda needed to do this herself, needed to reclaim her voice and her power in her own way. "Rick," Linda said, her voice steady, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened to Maya's guitar yesterday, and I need you to tell me the truth." Rick's expression shifted to concerned confusion, the perfect mask of someone being asked to explain something he'd already explained. "Linda, honey, we've been through this. It was an accident. I was moving the bookshelf and—" "Stop." Linda's voice cut through his practiced explanation like a blade. "I need you to tell me the truth, not the story you've been telling, not the explanation you think I want to hear. The truth." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Maya watched Rick's face, seeing the micro-expressions Danny had taught her to notice, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, the way his hands moved to rest protectively over his keyboard. "I don't understand what you're asking me," Rick said finally. "I've told you the truth. If Maya has been filling your head with conspiracy theories—" "Maya showed me the security footage," Linda said quietly. The change in Rick was instantaneous and complete. The concerned stepfather vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. His eyes flicked between Linda and Maya could practically see him running through scenarios, assessing damage, calculating his next moves. "What footage?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The camera was malfunctioning." "The thumbnail cache, the backup files you didn't know existed. We saw everything, Rick. Everything." Rick stared at her for a long moment, and Maya saw something in his expression that made her skin crawl.
Not surprise or shame or regret, but annoyance. He was annoyed at being caught, frustrated by this complication to his carefully managed narrative. "I see," he said finally. "And what exactly do you think you saw?" The casual dismissal, the implied doubt about their perceptions, the way he was still trying to control the narrative even when faced with irrefutable evidence, it all crystallized Maya's understanding of who Rick really was. He wasn't someone who made a mistake and was ashamed of it. He was someone who believed he had the right to destroy her possessions, to lie about it, to manipulate her and her mother into accepting his version of reality. "We saw you break my guitar on purpose," Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We saw you stage the scene afterward. We saw you delete the main footage. We saw everything." Rick leaned back in his chair, his practiced mask finally slipping away completely. What remained was someone Maya had glimpsed in moments over the past 3 years, but had never seen fully revealed. Cold, calculating, utterly without empathy for the pain he caused. "And what do you plan to do with this information?" he asked, his voice carrying a new edge. "We're leaving," Linda said simply. "Maya and I are leaving, and you're going to let us go without creating any drama or problems." Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Leaving? Linda, honey, think about what you're saying. Think about what you're giving up. This house, this life, this stability, you're going to throw it all away because a teenage girl can't accept that accidents happen?"
"It wasn't an accident," Linda said, and Maya heard the steel in her mother's voice. "It was deliberate, cruel, and completely unacceptable. You destroyed something precious that belonged to my daughter. Then you lied to both of us about it. That's not an accident, Rick. That's abuse." The word hung in the air between them. Abuse. Linda had finally named what had been happening in their house for 3 years, the systematic undermining of Maya's sense of reality and self-worth that had been disguised as family dynamics. Rick's expression hardened. "Abuse? Linda, you're being dramatic. I provided for you. For both of you. I gave you security, stability, a future. And this is how you repay me? By believing wild conspiracy theories over the man who has taken care of your family?" "You didn't take care of us," Maya said, finding her voice. "You controlled us. There's a difference." Rick's gaze shifted to Maya, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why her mother had been so afraid to challenge him. "Maya, you ungrateful little... Don't." Linda's voice cut across Rick's words like a whip. "Don't you dare speak to my daughter that way. Don't you dare call her ungrateful for refusing to accept your abuse." Rick stood up, his 6'2" frame suddenly seeming menacing in the confined space of the office. "My abuse? Linda, I have done nothing but try to make a family with you. I've been patient with Maya's attitude, supportive of her interests, generous with my time and resources. If she's unhappy, maybe she should look at her own behavior instead of blaming everyone else for her problems." The gaslighting was sophisticated, designed to make Linda doubt her perceptions and Maya's credibility. But something fundamental had shifted in Linda's understanding of their situation. She was no longer the confused, grateful woman who had accepted Rick's explanations and minimized her daughter's concerns. She was a mother protecting her child. "Get out," Linda said quietly. Rick blinked, clearly not having expected this response. "What?" "Get out of this house. Pack your things and leave. Maya and I will be staying here tonight to figure out our next steps, and I don't want you here while we do it." "Linda, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset, you're being emotional, you're not considering the consequences." "I'm considering the consequences. The consequence of staying with someone who would deliberately destroy my daughter's most precious possession and then lie about it. The consequence of continuing to enable someone who has been systematically undermining my child's sense of reality and self-worth. The consequence of teaching Maya that love means accepting abuse as long as it comes with financial stability." Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief,
of validation, of finally being seen and heard and protected by the person whose job it had been to protect her all along. Rick's mask was completely gone now, revealing something ugly and entitled underneath. "You're making a mistake, Linda. A huge mistake. You think you can survive without me? You think you can provide for Maya the way I have? You're going to end up broke, struggling, renting some apartment in a bad neighborhood, watching your daughter's opportunities disappear because you chose drama over stability." "Maybe," said Linda, "but at least we'll be safe. At least Maya won't have to wonder if the person who's supposed to love her is secretly destroying her things and gaslighting her about it." Rick stared at them for a long moment, his expressions cycling between anger, disbelief, and calculation. Maya could see him considering his options. Apologies, promises to change, threats, manipulation tactics designed to regain control of the situation.
"This isn't over," he said finally, his voice carrying an implicit threat. "Linda, you're going to regret this decision. And Maya, you're going to learn that the real world doesn't care about your feelings or your conspiracy theories." "The real world," Maya said quietly, "is full of people who don't destroy teenagers' guitars and then lie about it. The real world is actually kinder than this house has been." Rick gathered his laptop and a few personal items, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. At the office door, he turned back one final time. "The house is in my name," he said. "You have 30 days to figure out where you're going to live." After he left, Maya and Linda sat in the sudden silence of the office, listening to Rick moving around upstairs, gathering his things with the aggressive efficiency of someone who had been planning for this possibility. Car doors slammed, an engine started, and then the sound of his SUV backing out of the driveway and disappearing down the street. "We did it," Linda whispered, and Maya heard wonder in her mother's voice, as if she couldn't quite believe they had actually confronted Rick and won. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, seeing the pallor in her mother's face, the way Linda's hands were shaking slightly. "I'm terrified," Linda admitted. "I don't know how we're going to pay rent somewhere else. I don't know how I'm going to afford to keep you in the same school district. I don't know what our life is going to look like." Maya reached over and took her mother's hands, feeling the calluses from Linda's double shifts, the tension from years of typing and trying to hold their lives together. "But we'll figure it out together, without someone undermining us, gaslighting us, making us doubt ourselves." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I chose my own fear over your well-being. I'm sorry I let you hurt you for so long. You believed me when it mattered," Maya said. "You chose me when it counted." They spent the evening going through the house, separating their belongings from Rick's, packing the essentials they would need for whatever came next. Maya carefully wrapped each piece of her grandmother's guitar in tissue paper, placing them in a special box that would travel with them, wherever they ended up. The next morning, Danny called with news that changed everything. "Maya, you need to get down to the shop. Mr. Patterson wants to see you." Patterson Music was busy with Saturday morning students and parents, the familiar chaos of lessons and instrument rentals, and the constant sound of practice rooms. But Mr. Patterson's office was quiet, and his expression was serious when Maya and Linda arrived. "I heard about what happened," he said without preamble. "Danny told me about the guitar, about the circumstances, and I have something that might interest you." He led them to a case in the corner of his office, opening it to reveal a 1967 Martin D28 that looked almost identical to Maya's grandmother's guitar. Same warm wood, same mother-of-pearl inlays, same careful attention to detail that made these instruments legendary. "This belonged to Mrs. Chen," Mr. Patterson said quietly. "Your grandmother brought it to me 2 years before she died, asked me to hold it for safekeeping. She said it was for you, for when you were ready to understand its full value."
Maya stared at the guitar, her heart pounding. She had two? She bought this one as a backup, but she also said it was insurance. Insurance that you would always have a connection to your heritage, to her music, to the songs that needed to be passed down. She made me promise to give it to you if anything ever happened to her instrument.
Maya lifted the guitar from its case, feeling the familiar weight, the smooth wood under her fingers. When she strummed the first chord, the sound was exactly what she remembered: warm, rich, full of possibility and history and love. "There's more," Mr. Patterson continued. "Your grandmother also left money in an account here, enough to cover your lessons, your maintenance, your strings and picks for the next 10 years. She said music was an investment in your future, and she wanted to make sure nothing could take that away from you." Maya felt her grandmother's presence in that moment, the love and foresight of a woman who had understood that sometimes the most precious things needed to be protected from those who would destroy them. Popo had known, somehow, that Maya might need backup plans, alternative paths, safety nets woven from music and love and the determination to survive. "She also left you this," Mr. Patterson said, handing Maya an envelope with her name written in her grandmother's careful script. Inside was a letter in both Chinese and English, her grandmother's final gift of words and wisdom. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, it means someone tried to silence your song. It means someone thought they could break your spirit by breaking your guitar. They were wrong. Music lives in your heart, not in any instrument. Heritage lives in your choices, not in any object. Strength lives in your voice, not in any possession they can destroy. But sometimes we need instruments to help us remember our own power. Sometimes we need backup plans when people try to take away our tools for healing and creating and connecting. Play this guitar with joy. Play it with defiance. Play it with the knowledge that some songs are too important to be silenced, some truths too powerful to be hidden, some spirits too strong to be broken. You are my granddaughter. You carry my strength in your bones and my songs in your heart. Let no one convince you to be smaller than you are. With all my love and faith in your future, Popo." Maya looked up from the letter to find her mother crying and Mr. Patterson smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had kept a precious promise. "There's one more thing," he said. "The coffee shop is having their open mic tonight. They specifically asked if you might be ready to perform that arrangement you've been working on." Maya looked at the guitar in her hands, feeling its potential thrumming under her fingers. She thought about the lullaby she had been translating, the bridge between her grandmother's heritage and her own dreams, the song that Rick had tried to silence by destroying her instrument. "I'm ready," she said. That evening, Maya stood on the small stage at Sunset Coffee, her grandmother's backup guitar in her hands, her mother in the front row, Aria and Danny and half the senior class scattered throughout the audience. The lights were warm, the room was full, and for the first time in 3 years, Maya felt completely, authentically herself. This song is called Dragon's Lullaby. My grandmother wrote it in Chinese, and I translated it into English. It's about the strength that passes from one generation to the next, about songs that refuse to be silenced, about love that survives everything designed to destroy it. She began to play, her fingers finding the familiar chords, her voice rising clear and strong above the gentle conversations and coffee shop sounds.
The melody was her grandmother's, but the words were her own creation, a bridge between past and future, heritage and dreams. The woman who had crossed an ocean with music in her heart, and the granddaughter who had learned to fight for her right to sing. Dragons guard the songs we keep in our hearts when others sleep, through the storms and through the night. Ancient strength becomes our light.
As she sang, Maya saw her mother wiping away tears, saw Arya beaming with pride, saw Danny recording the performance with reverent attention. She saw strangers in the audience leaning forward, drawn into the story, the melody, the truth of a young woman claiming her voice and her heritage and her right to be heard. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous, but Maya barely heard it. She was thinking about her grandmother, about the guitar that had been destroyed and the backup that had been waiting, about the letter that had reminded her of who she was and what she carried forward. She was thinking about Rick, who had tried to silence her song and had only succeeded in teaching her to sing louder. She was thinking about her mother, who had chosen fear over truth for 3 years, but had chosen love over security when it mattered most. She was thinking about the future, uncertain, challenging, but finally completely her own. As Maya packed up her grandmother's guitar and prepared to leave the coffee shop, she felt the small dragon inlay in her pocket, the piece she had saved from the destroyed instrument. She would keep it always, a reminder of what had been broken and what had survived, of songs that refused to be silenced and spirits that refused to be diminished. Outside, the California evening was warm and full of possibility. Maya walked to her mother's car with her guitar case in one hand and her grandmother's letter in the other, carrying forward the music and the strength and the unbreakable knowledge that some truths are too important to be silenced. Her song would continue, her voice would be heard, her heritage would live on in every note she played, every story she told, every moment she chose courage over comfort, truth over peace, authentic love over convenient fiction. The dragon song was just beginning.